History is not a collection of facts. It is a story told by the victors. And the victors, they always get to write the legend. For 2,500 years, we have been told one of the most compelling stories of human courage. The story of Sparta. The 300 at Thermopylae. A society of philosopher warriors, forged in fire and discipline, who valued freedom above all else. We know this story. We love this story. It's clean. It's simple. It's about masculine sacrifice. The brutal agoge training that turned boys into iron. The mothers who told their sons to come back, with your shield or on it. It's a story of such powerful, stark beauty that it has become a modern myth. But what if it's all a lie? And what if the true hidden cost of creating this super soldier was a horror so dark, so systematically inflicted upon the most vulnerable members of their society, that it has been deliberately scrubbed from the history books? This is not a story of the battlefield. This is a story of the bedroom. This is the story of the daughters of Sparta. To understand the horror, you first have to understand the pressure cooker that was Sparta. We imagine a powerful, expansionist empire. But Sparta was a society living in a state of perpetual existential fear. The Spartan citizens, the Spartiates, were a tiny minority, a mere 8,000 to 10,000 people. They were outnumbered by a factor of 20 to 1 by a population of enslaved people known as the Helots. These weren't just servants. They were a conquered Greek population that seethed with hatred for their masters. The Spartiates lived every single day with the knowledge that at any moment, the people who farmed their food, built their homes, and tended their children could rise up and slaughter them in their sleep. This wasn't a vague fear. It was a cold, hard political reality. Every year, upon taking office, the Spartan ephors, the chief magistrates, would formally declare war on the Helot population. This was a legal fiction, granting them the right to kill any Helot they deemed a threat without religious pollution. They even had a secret police, the Cryptia, whose job was to infiltrate, terrorize, and murder the strongest and most rebellious Helots. This constant, simmering paranoia is the key. It explains everything. Why the agoge was so brutal? It was designed to create men who could control a population through sheer terror. And it explains why the Spartans became obsessed with quality over quantity. They couldn't afford to field a massive army of mediocre soldiers. They needed an elite corps of unstoppable super soldiers. Not just to fight foreign wars but to maintain their very existence at home. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. Because they realized that to create the perfect soldier, training wasn't enough. You had to build him from the ground up. You had to engineer him. From the moment of her birth, a Spartan girl was not seen as a future mother, a partner, or an individual. She was seen as the living foundation of the state itself. Her body was a national asset. Just like the boys, she was subjected to the dokimasia, the brutal inspection by the Gerousia. But the criteria were different. They ran their hands over her limbs, checking for robustness. They looked for any hint of weakness, any potential flaw that might make her a less than optimal childbearer. A slight deformity? A sickly constitution? The decision was swift and merciless. The baby would be taken to the apothetai, the place of rejection on Mount Taygetus, and exposed to the elements. Her crime? Being an unsatisfactory vessel for the Spartan state. Her right to life was entirely conditional on her perceived utility. Her childhood was a grand and sinister paradox. While Athenian girls were locked away in the inner chambers of their homes, learning to weave and be silent, Spartan girls were out in the open. They ran, they wrestled, they threw the javelin, they competed in races, often naked or semi-naked, in front of the entire community. This has often been misinterpreted as a form of female empowerment. It was not. This was state-mandated eugenics. The goal was twofold. First, the physical goal, to ensure she developed a strong, healthy body capable of surviving multiple, difficult pregnancies and birthing large, robust babies. They were building a better broodmare. But second, and more insidiously, was the psychological goal. From her earliest years, a Spartan girl was immersed in a cult of the state. Her songs were not of love or poetry. They were songs praising the bravery of Spartan sons and shaming cowardice. She was taught that her highest honor, her only true purpose, was to produce warriors. Her identity was systematically erased and replaced with a single, functional purpose. She was being programmed. Her mind was being shaped into the exact mold the state required. A mind that saw its own body as a tool for the greater good. The programming reached its climax in adolescence. Around the age of 18, sometimes younger, a girl would be assigned a husband. The match was not made for love or status or wealth. It was a genetic calculation, arranged by the state to merge what they deemed the finest biological stock. The wedding itself was not a celebration. It was a transaction. And the culmination of this transaction was a ritual so psychologically violent, it defies modern comprehension. This was the night of the broken girl. First, Ilara's head was shaved. All her beautiful hair, a symbol of her youth and femininity, was sheared off. This was an act of defeminization. It was meant to strip her of her individual identity, to make her anonymous, a blank slate. Then she was dressed not in a beautiful gown, but in a plain man's tunic and sandals. She was forced to impersonate the gender that held all power in her world. The message was clear: your femininity is irrelevant. Your identity is irrelevant. You are now fulfilling a function. Then she was left completely alone in a darkened room. She sat on a simple pallet, waiting in the silence. Later the door would open. A man would enter. Her husband. A man she may have seen from a distance, but to whom she had likely never spoken a single word. There were no words. No tenderness. He would consummate the marriage in a swift, functional and impersonal act. And then he would get up and leave. He would return to the barracks, to the company of men, as if nothing had happened. For the young man, this was a test of discipline, to perform his duty without emotional attachment. For the young woman, Ilara, it was a brutal, terrifying violation. It was the state using the body of a man to officially claim her body for its own purposes. Her initiation was complete. She was now a certified asset in the Spartan breeding program. But the horror of the wedding night was not the end. It was merely the beginning of a lifelong sentence. A Spartan marriage was a ghost of an institution. The husband lived in the barracks until he was 30. He visited his wife only by stealth, sneaking away at night. There was no home life, no partnership, no emotional bond. The relationship existed in these furtive, clandestine encounters, all focused on one goal: procreation. But the Spartan state, in its ruthless efficiency, had a plan for every contingency. What if a couple was infertile? In any other society, a private tragedy. In Sparta, a public crisis. A wasted genetic opportunity. The solution was a practice that turns our stomachs: wife-lending. If a man was infertile, or if he had already proven his genetic worth by fathering several strong sons, his wife could be compelled to have children with another man. This was not a secret affair. It was a formal, state-sanctioned arrangement. An older man with a young wife might invite a younger, more physically impressive champion to his home to impregnate her. A man could formally request the company of a friend's wife if he admired the quality of her children. Imagine the psychological torment for the woman. Let's return to Ilara. She has barely grown accustomed to the visits of her assigned husband when she is told that her duty to Sparta now requires her to receive another man. A stranger. There is no consent. Refusal is not an option. To refuse is to commit treason against the very idea of Sparta. She is a field, and the state is the farmer, deciding which seed will produce the best crop. Her body is communal property. Her emotions are irrelevant. Her trauma is a price the state is willing to pay. The most celebrated kings and generals of Sparta, men like Anaxandridas II, openly practiced this. He, married to his niece, was pressured to take a second wife for procreation, and maintain two separate households. The line between respected leader and participant in state-run polygamy is blurred beyond recognition. This system created what can only be described as a patriotic harem. The most successful warriors were rewarded with reproductive access to multiple women. The women, in turn, were moved between men like pieces on a eugenic chessboard, their lives a never-ending cycle of pregnancy and childbirth, with no power over whose child they would bear next. The exploitation was not confined to the bounds of marriage. For the unmarried girls of Sparta, the world was a place of constant, low-grade threat. The state's obsession with genetics created a permissive and often encouraging environment for the sexual activity of unmarried young people. The logic, from the state's perspective, was brutally simple. An unmarried Spartan man still carries superior genes. An unmarried Spartan woman is a viable reproductive resource. Therefore, any union that produces a strong child is a net gain for Sparta, regardless of marital status. This tacit approval created a culture where the lines of consent were dangerously blurred. A young girl walking alone, attending a festival, or even training in a secluded area, was not safe. An advance, a coerced encounter, could be justified by the young man, and often by society, as a patriotic act. I am strengthening the state, he could tell himself. If a pregnancy resulted, the child would be presented to the Gerousia. If it was strong and healthy, it was accepted. The mother had, in the eyes of the law, fulfilled her function. She might face some social stigma, but she had not sinned against the state. In fact, she had served it. This system placed the entire burden of this patriotic predation on the young women. They lived under a cloud of potential violation, where the very culture that was supposed to protect them had instead given their potential violators a moral justification. They were prey in a society that had legalized the hunt. So, let's step back and look at the horrifying full picture. Let's connect the dots from the suffering of the women to the legend of the super soldier. The Spartan warrior who stood at Thermopylae was not a self-made man. He was a manufactured product. His existence was the end result of a cold, calculated, multi-generational breeding program. His mother had been selected for her physical robustness and health, conditioned from childhood for one purpose. His father had been selected for his military prowess and courage. The very circumstances of his conception were likely dictated by the state, through a system of marriage, wife-lending, or unsanctioned but tolerated encounters. When this boy, this curated genetic product, was taken from his mother at age 7 and thrown into the agoge, he wasn't starting from zero. The Spartans believed he was starting with a superior biological foundation. The agoge was not designed to create strength, it was designed to reveal it. The starvation, the cold, the brutal floggings, these were not just training. They were a quality control test. A weakling, a boy with poor genetics would break and die. A boy with the superior engineered genetics of the Spartan program would survive and be hardened. His famed discipline, his ability to kill without remorse, his endurance, these were not just products of training. In the Spartan mind, they were the manifestation of his superior bloodline. The phalanx, that unbreakable wall of shields, was not just a military formation. It was the final, terrifying expression of a system that began in the womb. Every soldier was a living monument to the silent, suffering women who had been used to create him. We are often told that Spartan women were the most free and powerful in the ancient world. And on the surface, the evidence seems compelling. They could own and inherit property, often controlling vast wealth. They were educated. They were physically robust. They could speak openly and were known for their sharp tongues. But this is the ultimate Spartan deception. This freedom was a gilded cage, meticulously designed by the state to serve its own ends. Why let women own property? Because when the men were perpetually at war or in the barracks, someone had to manage the estates. It was a practical necessity, not a right born of equality. Why encourage their physical strength and outspokenness? Because a confident, healthy, assertive woman was a more effective manager of the household and, crucially, a more robust and resilient breeder. The state wasn't empowering women, it was optimizing its breeding stock. Every aspect of their so-called freedom was a calculated move to make them more productive and compliant cogs in the eugenics machine. Their famous quote, telling their sons to return with your shield or on it, is not a testament to female empowerment. It is the ultimate expression of their indoctrination. It is the voice of a woman whose identity has been so completely consumed by the state that she values its military success over the life of her own child. She has become the chief enforcer of the very system that enslaves her. The story of Sparta is the ultimate cautionary tale. It shows us how easily a noble ideal, the defense of one's homeland, can be twisted into a monstrosity. It shows how a society can become so focused on an end goal that it willingly, systematically, destroys the humanity of its own people to achieve it. The next time you see that iconic Spartan helmet, I want you to see past the legend. Look deeper. Look into the polished bronze of the shield and see if you can see the reflections. The reflection of a young girl having her head shaved. The reflection of a wife being led to a stranger's bed. The reflection of an unmarried girl, glancing fearfully over her shoulder in the shadows. The Spartan warrior was a marvel of human engineering. But his creation required a foundation of unimaginable suffering. The glory of the phalanx was built on a bedrock of broken spirits. The legend of the super soldier is, in its dark heart, the story of a state that turned its daughters into weapons and in doing so, lost its own soul.